And it's been nearly a year since those historic protests across Cuba and right here on the streets of South Florida. And crowds coming out in droves, we're talking about, united by a common cause, the fight for freedom. The Cuban people have been gripped by generations of communism.
Many on the island are fed up and despite the risks, continue calling for change. Local 10's Hatzel Vela is live in Little Havana with the latest on the crisis in Cuba.
So Bridget, Laren, we're live here in Little Havana because this is going to be the focal point of one of many of activities that we're going to see on Monday, the one-year anniversary of those historic protests. But guess what? We're already seeing protests in Washington and obviously so much more to come, including right now talking to folks on the island about what it's like being there as we get closer to the anniversary.
They are in jail for simple things like asking for freedom and for democracy.
From the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial, solidarity in Washington for the thousands of Cubans who a year ago took to the streets demanding freedom. Tonight, also from Washington, the Biden administration announced further sanctions on Cuba. Visa restrictions, they say, on 28 Cuban officials the U.S. government says are implicated in the repression of the July 11th protest. Washington will not say who they are, but the Secretary of State says instead of ensuring the safety of the Cuban people and respect for the freedoms of expression and peaceful assembly, these officials permitted or facilitated violent and unjust detentions, sham trials, and prison sentences spanning decades for hundreds of protesters. Human rights organizations who track what's happening on the island say more than 1,400 protesters were detained. More than 700 Cubans remain in detention, many of them sentenced to significant prison time. People like Donaida Perez Paseiro and her husband Loreto Hernandez Garcia from the town of Placetas in the Villa Clara province in central Cuba. From Cuba, their daughter tells me she's worried about their situation in prison. Both are accused of public disorder, among other charges. Her stepmother was sentenced to 8 years, her father 7. So back out live here in Little Havana, with the place where you're going to see some of several events happening on Monday. We're going to keep you posted, let you know what happens, of course. We have a whole list of things on local10.com, but guess what? When it comes to the conversation about Cuba and what's happened since July 11th, you can check out a segment on This Week in South Florida that's happening tomorrow morning, 11:30, with Glenna Bilberg and Michael Putney. You're going to have the best, when it comes to the conversation, the best sound bites, the best folks, experts to address what's happening on the island. But for now, reporting live from Little Havana, I'm Hatzel Vela, Local 10 News.